This is Artur Belkin, Metro Authority excavation engineer. February 14th, 6 a.m. I've spent most of my adult life underground, and I'm not the type to spook easy over shadows or strange noises. We were expanding the Taganskaya station, standard work. The line's been overcrowded for years, and the city wanted another platform to ease congestion. Our crew had been drilling and excavating for about 3 months, and everything was going according to schedule. Boring work, really. Predictable. The kind of job where you stop thinking about what you're doing and just let your body go through the motions. I was working with 2 other guys. Adrian Dorosh, 45, and has been doing this longer than both of us combined. The kind of guy who'd seen everything and didn't get excited about anything anymore. Quiet, steady. If he said something was off, you listened. And Vladimir Savin, 29, and has been with the authority for 6 years. Surveyor. Still had that nervous energy young guys get when they're working deep underground, always double-checking measurements, always asking questions. It was a Tuesday night shift. We were about 120 meters below street level, drilling through a section of bedrock that wasn't supposed to be there according to the surveys. That happens sometimes. The maps are old, and the ground shifts. You adjust and keep going. Around 3:40 in the morning, the drill bit punched through into open space. That got our attention. Open space that deep isn't normal, not unless you're hitting an old storm drain or a forgotten Soviet tunnel. But the readings didn't match anything on file. Vladimir radioed up to the site supervisor, who told us to hold position and investigate. Routine procedure. We widened the hole enough to fit through, then dropped a camera down on a cable to see what we were looking at. The feed showed a concrete corridor, maybe 3 meters wide, with overhead lighting fixtures that were decades old. The walls were smooth, institutional, the kind of construction you'd see in a Cold War-era government building. Adrian looked at the footage and said, "That's not on any map." Vladimir asked if we should report it. Adrian said we already did, and they told us to check it out. We climbed down one at a time. I went first because I'm lighter and the rope ladder was old. The drop was about 4 meters. My boots hit concrete, and I swept my flashlight around to get a sense of the space. The corridor extended in both directions, maybe 30 meters to the left and 20 meters to the right before turning. The air was stale, but breathable. Cold, too. Colder than it should have been that far underground. There were old light fixtures mounted to the ceiling, the kind with metal cages over the bulbs, but none of them worked. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, except for the floor. The floor looked clean, almost polished. That struck me as odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Adrian came down next, then Vladimir. We stood there for a minute, just taking it in. Vladimir walked over to the wall and ran his hand along it. The concrete was smooth, no cracks, no water damage. Whoever built this did it well. "How old do you think this is?" Adrian asked. 50s, maybe. 60s at the latest. Vladimir shrugged. "Why isn't it on the maps?" Because they didn't want it on the maps. That made sense. Moscow's full of hidden Soviet infrastructure. Bunkers, storage depots, tunnels that were supposed to connect government buildings in case of an invasion. Most of them were sealed up and forgotten after the Union collapsed. Finding one wasn't unusual. We started walking to the right, toward the turn. Our boots echoed on the concrete, and the sound carried further than it should have in a space that small. Adrian kept his flashlight aimed at the ceiling, checking for structural damage. Vladimir was looking at the walls, trying to spot any markings or identification numbers. I was just watching where I stepped. The corridor turned left and opened into a wider room. It looked like some kind of checkpoint. There were 2 desks, both empty, and a metal security door at the far end. The door had a wheel lock on it, like something you'd see on a submarine hatch. Next to the door was a faded sign with Cyrillic lettering. I couldn't read all of it. The paint had chipped away. But I could make out 2 words: Project Endurance. Adrian walked over to the door and examined the lock. "It's been sealed from the outside," he said. "Can we open it?" I asked. He grabbed the wheel and pulled. It didn't move. He tried again, putting his weight into it. Still nothing. Then Vladimir came over and both of them pulled together. The wheel groaned, metal scraping against metal, and then it turned. Slowly at first, then faster. When it stopped, Adrian pushed the door inward. The air that came out was different, colder, thicker. It smelled like rust and something else I couldn't place. Something chemical, maybe. Antiseptic. Beyond the door was another corridor, but this one had rooms branching off on both sides. We walked through, checking each one as we passed. The first room on the left looked like a storage area. Metal shelves lined the walls, most of them empty, but a few still had boxes stacked on them. The boxes were old, the cardboard brittle and discolored. I didn't open any of them. The second room was a dormitory. 6 bunks, 3 on each side, with thin mattresses and folded gray blankets. Everything was neat. The third room was locked. Adrian tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. We moved on. At the end of the corridor was another door, this one labeled Main Laboratory. Adrian pushed it open and we stepped inside. Maybe 15 meters across, with high ceilings and bright lights that were somehow still working. I don't know how. The place had been sealed for decades, but the lights came on automatically when we walked in, triggered by motion sensors that still functioned. The lab was full of equipment, old stuff, Soviet era. Monitoring stations with analog dials and switches, filing cabinets against the walls, a long metal table with restraints bolted to it. And at the far end of the room, behind a glass partition, were 3 large cylindrical tanks. Each tank was about 2 meters tall and 1 meter wide, made of reinforced glass or some kind of transparent material. They were filled with a clear liquid, and inside each one was some sort of a humanoid creature. They were suspended in the liquid, perfectly still. Their skin was pale, almost gray, and their eyes were closed. But it was their proportions that made me stop and stare. They were tall. Too tall. Maybe 2.2 meters, which would have been unusual enough on its own, but it was more than that. Their limbs were wrong. Arms and legs too long for their torsos, stretched out in a way that didn't look natural. Their fingers were thin and extended, almost skeletal, the kind of hands you'd see in a medical diagram showing bones without muscle. They floated there, arms at their sides, heads tilted slightly forward. The liquid was completely clear, no bubbles, no movement except for the faint ripples caused by our footsteps vibrating through the floor. Adrian walked closer to the glass partition, then stopped. He leaned in, looking at the nearest tank. "There's nothing attached to them," he said. I didn't understand what he meant at first. Then I looked closer and realized he was right. No tubes, no wires, no equipment of any kind connecting the subjects to the tanks or to any external machinery. The tanks had metal caps bolted to the top, completely airtight. Preserved, maybe, like specimens in formaldehyde. But the liquid was clear, not cloudy or discolored the way you'd expect after decades. Vladimir turned to look at me. "What kind of facility is this?" I didn't have an answer. Adrian didn't either. It was Vladimir who noticed the desk. It was off to the side, near one of the filing cabinets. A simple metal desk with a glass paperweight holding down a stack of papers. The paperweight was shaped like a red star. Very Soviet. He walked over and picked up the top sheet. It was a typed document, yellowed with age, the ink faded, but still legible. He scanned it for a moment, then looked up at us. "You need to see this." We walked over. Vladimir handed me the paper. It was a cover sheet for a folder labeled Project Endurance Trial Phase. The date at the top was November 1953. I flipped to the next page. It was a summary document written in that bureaucratic style the Soviets loved. Dense paragraphs, no wasted words, everything clinical and detached. I skimmed through it. The project was described as an experimental program for developing self-sustaining biological systems. The goal was to create soldiers who wouldn't need food, water, or oxygen for extended periods. Soldiers who could be deployed in extreme environments without logistical support. There were references to metabolic restructuring and autonomous cellular regeneration, but no details on how any of it actually worked. Further down, there was a section labeled Trial Results. It listed 47 initial subjects. Only 3 survived the conversion process. Subjects 1, 2, and 3, the ones in the tanks. I set the paper down and looked at Adrian. He was reading through another document, this one with photos clipped to it. A personnel roster. Black and white photographs of men and women in military uniforms. Their names were listed beneath each photo, along with their ranks and assignment dates. The last entry was dated November 18th, 1953. Adrian held the roster up so we could see. His voice was flat when he spoke. They've been down here for 71 years. 3 people sealed in glass, just floating in liquid that shouldn't still be clear. And according to the documents in front of us, they'd been like that since 1953. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not fear, not yet. Just a deep, uncomfortable certainty that we'd found something we weren't supposed to find. We need to report this. I said it, but my voice didn't sound certain. Adrian nodded slowly. He set the roster back on the desk. Yeah. Vladimir was still staring at the tanks. Do you think they're dead? They have to be. Adrian pulled out his radio and tried to call up to the surface. Static. He adjusted the frequency and tried again. Still nothing. The signal wasn't getting through. Too much concrete and rock between us and the relay station. We'll have to go back up, he said. I was about to agree when I noticed another door on the far side of the lab. It was partially hidden behind one of the filing cabinets, but I could see the label on it. Adrian looked at me. What? I pointed at the door. We should check that first. Because if we report this blind, they'll shut us out. They'll take over the site, and we'll never know what any of this was. Vladimir nodded. He's right. If this is classified, they won't tell us anything. Adrian looked between us, then back at the tanks. He didn't like it. Fine, he said, but we make it quick. We started walking toward the documentation room. Our boots echoed on the tile floor. Behind us, the tanks stood silent and still. I didn't look back. If I had, I might have noticed the change. Tank number 1, the one closest to the door we'd come through, had started to leak. Just a thin trickle at first, running down the side of the glass and pooling on the floor beneath it. The liquid was spreading slowly, dark against the white tile. The seal had broken. The research documentation room was smaller than I expected. Just a storage closet, really, with 2 filing cabinets and a desk covered in dust. Adrian went straight for the cabinets while Vladimir and I checked the desk. Most of the papers were too damaged to read, the ink faded to nothing, or the pages stuck together from decades of moisture. We found a few blueprints showing the facility layout, but they didn't tell us anything we hadn't already figured out. There's more back here, Adrian said. Just an opening leading deeper into the complex. We followed him through. The corridor beyond was narrower, more utilitarian. No signage, no decorations, just concrete walls and bare bulbs strung along the ceiling, most of them burned out. Our flashlights cut through the darkness as we moved forward, and the air got colder the further we went. I could see my breath. The first room we found was labeled personnel quarters. The door was open. Inside were a dozen bunks arranged in 2 rows, military style. The mattresses were thin and old, some of them torn, and the blankets were folded at the foot of each bed. But 3 of the bunks were unmade. Sheets pulled back, pillows still dented from where someone's head had been. It looked like the people sleeping there had just gotten up and left. Vladimir walked over to one of the unmade bunks and picked up a small leather wallet sitting on the nightstand. He opened it and pulled out an ID card. The plastic was yellowed and cracked, but the photo was still visible. A man in his 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a white lab coat. The name, printed below the photo, read, Dr. Anton Dubo. "Why leave everything?" Vladimir asked. He was looking at the wallet, turning it over in his hands. If they evacuated, why not take their things? Adrian didn't answer. He was already moving to the next room. We found the canteen further down the corridor. It was a small space, maybe 6 meters across, with 4 tables and a serving counter at the back. There were plates still sitting on the tables, metal trays with food that had long since turned to dust or mummified into unrecognizable shapes. A cup was overturned near the edge of one table, the liquid inside dried to a dark stain on the surface. Everything was exactly where it had been left 71 years ago, frozen in time. "They left in a hurry," I said. Adrian nodded. "Yeah." The medical wing was at the end of the corridor. The door was closed, but not locked. Adrian pushed it open and we stepped inside. The room was larger than the others, with examination tables along one wall and shelves stocked with old medical supplies. There were glass cabinets full of instruments I didn't recognize, all of them neatly arranged and labeled in Cyrillic. At the back of the room was a metal desk with filing cabinets on either side. I walked over to the desk and opened the top drawer. Inside were stacks of papers, reports, logs. I pulled out a handful and started reading. Most of it was technical, medical observations, physiological data, things I didn't fully understand. But there were dates at the top of each page, and I could follow the progression. Day 47. Subjects exhibiting unexpected response patterns. Day 89. Feeding protocol altered, results inconclusive. Day 116. Volkov assignment terminated. Cause, the word was crossed out, illegible. Day 121. Second incident, no witnesses, recovery attempted. Day 124. Termination methods proving ineffective, request guidance. Day 127. Evacuation commencing immediately. The handwriting got worse as the dates progressed, shakier. Some of the entries were barely legible, just scratches on the page. At the bottom of the last report was a single line, written in large, uneven letters. If this seal breaks, do not attempt rescue. I sat with that for a second. Then I set the papers down and looked at Adrian. He was reading over my shoulder, his face unreadable in the dim light. "What do you think happened?" Vladimir asked. "I don't know," I said. "But I had a guess. Whatever they were trying to do down here, it went wrong. And they knew it was going to stay wrong." Adrian walked to the door and looked back down the corridor. "We should check the director's office, see if there's anything else." We found it 2 doors down. The nameplate on the door said, Director, Project Endurance Operations. Inside was a simple desk, a filing cabinet, and a bookshelf lined with binders. The desk had papers scattered across it, some of them pinned down by a glass paperweight. I picked up the top sheet. It was handwritten, dated November 18th, 1953. Termination protocols have failed. Request immediate evacuation. Facility containment is secure. All subjects remain sealed. Under no circumstances should this site be reopened. Recommend permanent burial. Several words were scratched out, unreadable. and at the bottom, stamped in red ink, classified, permanent containment. That was it. No explanation of what happened. No details on why termination failed, just the order to seal and bury. Vladimir read the report over my shoulder. They buried them alive, he said quietly. Yeah, I said. We stood there for a moment, just taking it in. Then Adrian turned toward the door. We need to leave. Now. I agreed. We'd seen enough. Whatever this place was, whatever they were doing down here, it was over. We just needed to get back to the surface and report what we'd found. We walked back through the corridor, past the canteen and the crew quarters, back toward the main lab. Our boots echoed on the concrete, too loud in the silence. And then I heard it. A dripping sound, slow and steady, like water hitting tile. I stopped walking. Adrian and Vladimir stopped behind me. You hear that? I asked. Adrian nodded. We moved forward, slower now, and stepped back into the main laboratory. But something was different. Tank number 1 was open. The seal had been opened from the inside. The glass top was pushed aside, metal clasps broken, the opening gaping. The liquid that had filled the tank was pooled on the floor, spreading outward in a wide circle. And the tank itself was empty. I felt my chest tighten. Where is it? Vladimir whispered. I didn't answer. I shined my flashlight toward the other 2 tanks. Tank number 2 and tank number 3. They were still sealed, still filled with liquid. The subjects inside were still floating, motionless. We need to go, Adrian said. His voice was flat, controlled, but I could hear the edge in it. Right now. We turned and moved toward the exit corridor, walking fast. Vladimir was in the lead, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. I stayed on his heels. Adrian was behind me. I could hear his boots on the concrete, the sound echoing in the narrow space. We passed through the checkpoint, back into the entry corridor. The rope ladder we'd climbed down was still hanging where we'd left it. Vladimir reached it first and grabbed the bottom rung. He turned to look back at us. Come on, he said. Let's... He stopped. His face changed. Where's Adrian? I turned around. The corridor behind me was empty. No flashlight beam, no footsteps, just darkness. He was right behind me, I said. Vladimir stepped away from the rope. When did you last see him? I didn't know. I'd heard his boots maybe 30 seconds ago. But I hadn't actually looked back to confirm it was him. Adrian, I called. No answer. We both stood there, flashlights sweeping the corridor. Nothing. No movement. No sound. He was just here, I said. Vladimir didn't say anything. He just started walking back toward the checkpoint. I followed, keeping my light low and steady. We found him in the crew quarters. He was standing in the center of the room between the rows of bunks, facing the wall, completely still, not moving, not responding to our calls, just standing there. Adrian? I said. Nothing. I walked closer, slowly. Vladimir stayed by the door, his flashlight aimed at Adrian's back. I reached out and touched Adrian's shoulder. He collapsed, just dropped straight down, like someone had cut his strings. He hit the floor hard, and I jumped back, my heart hammering in my chest. Vladimir rushed over. We both knelt down beside him. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. No breathing. His skin was cold. He was dead. No marks, no blood, no wounds. Just dead. What the fuck? Vladimir said. His voice was shaking now. What the fuck just happened? I didn't have an answer. I stood up, backing away from the body. My hands were shaking. I couldn't stop staring at Adrian, at how still he was. We need to leave. Right now. Vladimir didn't argue. We ran, back through the corridor, past the checkpoint, into the entry chamber. The rope ladder was still there. Vladimir grabbed it and started climbing. I was right behind him, my boots slipping on the rungs. And then I looked back. At the far end of the corridor, just beyond the checkpoint, something was standing in the shadows. Tall, pale, human-shaped, but wrong. The way the subjects in the tanks had looked. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and climbed. Vladimir went first, moving fast but controlled. I was right behind him, my hands gripping the rope so tight my knuckles ached. The ladder swayed with our weight, scraping against the concrete walls of the shaft. Every few seconds I looked down, back toward the corridor, but I couldn't see anything. Just darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. The only thing that mattered was getting to the surface. Vladimir was about 10 meters above me when he stopped climbing. I looked up. "What's wrong?" I asked. He didn't answer. He was just hanging there, one hand on the rope, not looking down at me, just still. "Vladimir?" I said. His hand slipped off the rung. He didn't grab for it, didn't try to catch himself. He just let go and fell. I pressed myself against the ladder as his body dropped past me, close enough that I felt the air move. He hit the concrete below with a sound I won't forget, wet and heavy and final. I knew he was dead. I could tell from the sound. I just hung there on the ladder, my chest heaving, trying to understand what had just happened. He'd been fine. He'd been climbing. And then he just stopped and fell. No scream, no struggle, just the fall. I looked down into the darkness below. I couldn't see his body, couldn't see anything but the faint glow of my flashlight reflecting off the concrete walls. And then I felt it. Not a sound, not a sight, just a feeling. Like the air around me had changed, heavier, thicker. Like the pressure in the shaft had shifted and my ears were trying to pop but couldn't. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was down there, in the darkness below me. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but I knew it was there. My arms felt like lead, my legs weak and shaky. But I kept going. The feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger the higher I climbed. That sense of something below me, something waiting. I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing and the creak of the rope ladder. When I finally pulled myself over the edge and onto the excavation site level, I just lay there for a moment, gasping, my whole body shaking. And then I heard it. A sound coming from the main tunnel. Not from below, from above. Machinery, heavy machinery. The hydraulic groan of a concrete mixer. They were sealing the breach. I pushed myself up, legs barely responding, and looked toward the tunnel. I could see light at the far end, maybe 40 meters away. Bright work lights, shadows moving, the sound of voices shouting orders. My legs felt like they were made of concrete themselves, every step a monumental effort. The exhaustion was crushing, like something was pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt like I was moving through water, through something thick and resistant that didn't want to let me pass. The lights at the end seemed to get further away instead of closer. I tried to shout, "Wait, I'm still down here." My voice came out weak, thin. It didn't carry. The machinery was too loud. I kept moving, one step, another, my boots dragging on the concrete, my arms hanging limp at my sides. Everything in my body was screaming at me to stop, to lie down, to rest. But I kept going. I could see them now. Workers in hard hats, moving around a concrete mixer. A metal framework going up across the tunnel entrance. One of the workers looked in my direction. I saw him turn his head, saw him look right at me. Then he turned back to his work. He'd seen me. I know he did. But he just turned back and kept working. I was maybe 20 meters away when they started pouring. The concrete flowed into the framework, gray and wet and final. They were sealing it, right in front of me, while I was still meters away, still struggling to reach them. "Please," I said. "I'm here." They didn't stop, didn't slow down. The concrete kept pouring, filling the frame, rising higher. I could see it hardening as I watched, the surface going dull and solid. I was 10 meters away when they finished. The wall was complete, smooth concrete from floor to ceiling, sealing the tunnel shut. I stopped walking, stood there swaying, my chest heaving. I stared at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. They'd sealed me in, not by accident, not because they didn't know I was here. They'd seen me. That worker had looked right at me and then gone back to building the wall. The government knew I was down here, and they were doing it anyway. I spent 20 minutes trying every option, pounding on the concrete, shouting into the radio, searching for gaps in the seal. Nothing worked. I was standing there when I heard the pumps start, a deep mechanical noise from above. The pressure had dropped. I felt it again, sharper this time, painful. They were evacuating the air. I'd seen this procedure on a chemical spill site in St. Petersburg. Create negative pressure to prevent contamination from escaping. Pump out the atmosphere. Seal the space. Standard containment protocol for biological threats. My ears popped. The pressure kept dropping. I had maybe 3 minutes before the air became too thin to breathe. 5 at most. The excavation site had no independent ventilation. They'd pump it down to near vacuum, then seal everything with concrete. I looked around. The walls were solid, the tunnel was sealed. Except down. The facility below had its own air circulation. I'd felt it when we entered. A faint breeze, ventilation fans still running after 70 years. Self-contained. My chest was tightening. Each breath felt thinner. I walked back to the shaft opening. I didn't want to go back down. Didn't want to be near those things in the tanks. The creature that already had escaped and was down there waiting. But the air was gone, and my body made the choice my mind couldn't. I grabbed the rope and descended. Not to safety, to the only place I could still breathe. There was a storage corridor I'd seen earlier, branching off from the crew quarters. I found it in the darkness, my flashlight cutting weak beams through the air. Small, maybe 3 meters by 3 meters. Metal shelves lined the walls, stocked with old supplies. Boxes, crates, things I didn't bother to look at. There was just enough room to stand, to move, and there was a lock on the inside of the door. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The lock clicked into place. I turned off my flashlight to save the battery. The darkness was absolute. I sat down on the floor, my back against the wall, and just breathed. My whole body was shaking. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had happened, but I couldn't. None of it made sense. Adrian was dead. Vladimir was dead. I was sealed underground with whatever had been in those tanks. I sat there in the darkness and listened. Silence. Complete, oppressive silence. I couldn't hear anything. No machinery, no footsteps, no dripping water. Nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the beating of my own heart. And somehow, that was worse than any sound could have been. I don't know how much time passed. I wasn't looking at my watch, wasn't thinking about anything except the fact that I was alone down here. Except I wasn't alone. In that storage room, the dark made time useless. After a while, my thoughts slowed down, became sluggish. I realized I was thirsty. My throat was dry, my tongue thick in my mouth. I hadn't had water since before we'd drilled through. That felt like days ago, but it might have only been hours. I couldn't stay in this room forever. The door was locked from the inside, which made me feel safer, but it also meant I was trapped. No water, no food, just darkness and silence and the slow realization that I was going to die down here if I didn't do something. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my radio. I'd forgotten about it during everything else. It was a short-range unit, standard issue for excavation work, designed to reach the surface from 120 meters down, but only if you had line of sight or minimal interference. Down here, surrounded by concrete and rock, I didn't expect it to work, but I tried anyway. I turned it on. The static was loud in the silence, crackling and hissing. I adjusted the frequency, found the channel we'd been using. "This is Belkin," I said. My voice sounded hoarse. "I'm sealed underground. My crew is dead. Does anyone copy?" Static. I tried again. "This is Artur Belkin, excavation engineer. I'm trapped in the Soviet facility beneath Taganskaya station. I need extraction. Please respond." More static. I was about to turn it off when I heard something. A voice, faint and distorted, cutting through the noise. "Receiving you, Belkin." I nearly dropped the radio. Yes, I'm here. I need help. The tunnel is sealed. I can't get out." A pause. Then the voice again, clearer this time. Calm, professional. "Site containment protocol in effect. Do not attempt communication." "What?" I said. "No, you don't understand. I'm trapped down here. There are things down here. 2 men are dead. You need to send help." "Containment protocol in effect," the voice repeated. "You're going to bury me alive," I shouted into the radio. "I'm a civilian worker. You can't just leave me here." Silence. Long enough that I thought they'd cut the connection. Then a different voice. Older, calmer. The kind of voice that's used to giving orders and having them followed. "Mr. Belkin, containment seal is permanent. No exceptions." "Why are you doing this?" No answer. "Please," I said. "There has to be another way. I didn't do anything. The radio went dead, not static, just silence. I tried again, cycling through every frequency, every channel. Nothing. Just the empty hiss of dead air. They weren't coming. They'd sealed me in deliberately, and they weren't going to change their minds. Whatever was down here, whatever those things in the tanks were, the government had decided it was worth more to keep them contained than to save my life. I sat there for a long time, holding the dead radio, trying to process that. Eventually, I stood up. I couldn't stay in the storage room. I'd die of thirst in a few days, maybe less. If there was any chance of survival, I needed to find water, food, some way to extend the time I had left. I unlocked the door and stepped back into the corridor. The facility was silent. I moved slowly, listening for any sound of movement, any sign that I wasn't alone. Nothing. The canteen had food, but it was 71 years old and completely inedible. The crew quarters had nothing. The medical wing had supplies, but no water. Then I found the ventilation system. It was in a maintenance room off the main corridor, behind a door marked Environmental Controls. The room was filled with machinery, old Soviet-era equipment that was somehow still running. Pumps, filters, circulation fans. All of it humming quietly, keeping the air in the facility breathable. But it was a closed system. Internal circulation only. No intake from outside, no exhaust to the surface. The bunker had been designed as a completely sealed environment, self-contained, meant to operate independently for extended periods, meant to keep things in. I stood there, looking at the machinery, and felt something cold settle in my chest. There was no other exit, no maintenance tunnels leading to the surface. The facility had been built to be buried, to be forgotten. And now I was buried with it. I left the maintenance room and walked back through the complex. There was nowhere else to go. I'd checked every room, every corridor. The only place I hadn't gone back to was the main laboratory. I didn't want to go back there. The thought of being in that room again, with those tanks, made my skin crawl. But I didn't have a choice. I needed to see if there was anything I'd missed, any equipment that might help, any information that might tell me how to survive down here. I walked through the corridors, past the crew quarters, past the checkpoint, and pushed open the door to the lab. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. Tank number 2 and tank number 3 were still sealed. The subjects inside were still floating in the clear liquid, perfectly preserved. I walked closer, my flashlight aimed at tank number 2, and then I stopped. The subject's eyes were open. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I moved closer to the glass partition. The eyes were completely black, solid black. They pointed in my direction, or seemed to. I couldn't tell if they were moving, if they were alive, if anything behind them registered the fact that I existed. Fixed on a point that might have been my face, or might have been the wall behind me. I didn't know when they'd opened. Had they been open the whole time? Had I just not noticed before because I was too focused on the empty tank? Or had they opened while I was gone, exploring the facility, sitting in the dark storage room? The subject didn't blink, didn't react to my presence, eyes open and staring at nothing, or at everything. I looked at tank number 3. The subject's eyes were still closed, still asleep, if that's what it was. I backed away from the tanks, my heart pounding in my chest. Subject number 1 was still out there, still loose. That was the immediate threat, the one that had been near Adrian when he died, the one I'd seen standing in the shadows, watching me. But these two, they were changing, waking up, and I didn't know what that meant. I left the lab and walked back to the storage room. It was the only place that felt even remotely safe. The door could lock. The room was small, defensible. I could sit with my back to the wall and watch the door and know that nothing could come up behind me. I locked the door and sat down in the darkness. And I waited. I remembered the ventilation maintenance shaft I'd seen earlier. A narrow access tunnel running behind the environmental controls room. It had a steel grate over the entrance, but the screws were old and loose. I could get inside, crawl deeper into the system. Maybe find another way out, or at least a place where I could wedge myself in and wait. I left the storage room and made my way back through the corridors. I found the ventilation shaft and pulled the grate free. The opening was small, maybe half a meter wide and just as tall. I had to get down on my hands and knees to fit through. The metal was cold under my palms and the air inside smelled like dust and old iron. I crawled forward. The shaft was tight, the walls pressing in on both sides. My shoulders scraped against the metal with every movement, the sound echoing in the narrow space. I had my flashlight in one hand, the beam cutting through the darkness ahead of me. The shaft went on for what felt like forever. Straight at first, then curving to the left, then downward at a slight angle. The air got colder the deeper I went. Staler, like it had been sitting here, undisturbed, for decades. I kept crawling, my elbows ached. Eventually, I reached the end. The shaft terminated in a heavy industrial fan, the blades rusted and motionless. Beyond it was a solid concrete wall. No opening, no exit. The fan was part of the internal circulation system, pulling air through the facility and pushing it back out into the corridors. A closed loop. I pressed my hand against the fan housing and felt the faint movement of air. Recycled, stale, going nowhere. The vent wasn't an escape route, it was a coffin. I sat there for a long time, my back against the cold metal, trying to process that. I'd been crawling toward nothing. There was no way out. There never had been. My phone was still in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Battery at 8%. Maybe an hour left if I was lucky. I opened the camera app and hit record. The screen lit up my face, harsh and unflattering in the darkness. I looked terrible, pale, gaunt. "My name is Arthur Belkin," I said. My voice sounded flat in the confined space. "I'm an excavation engineer. It's February 11th, 2025. I'm 120 meters underground in a sealed facility beneath Taganskaya Station." I paused. My throat was so dry, it hurt to talk. "My crew is dead. The government sealed the facility while I was still inside. They knew I was here. They didn't care. They wanted to bury the secret. And if that meant burying me too, that was acceptable." The phone screen dimmed. I tapped it to keep it on. "If anyone finds this, don't open the tanks." I swallowed, tasting dust. "They don't hunt. They don't move. But they drain you, just by being near them. Leave this place buried. Don't come back down." I stopped the recording. The screen went dark, and I was left sitting in the narrow shaft with only my flashlight for company. And then, the adrenaline faded, and the thirst hit me. It was sudden, overwhelming. My throat felt like sandpaper. My tongue was thick and swollen in my mouth. The panic came next. The walls of the shaft felt like they were pressing in, crushing me. The air was too thin, too stale. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My chest tightened and my hands started shaking. I scrambled through my pockets looking for anything. A mint, a piece of gum, a forgotten water bottle. I needed something to cut the dryness in my mouth. And I couldn't stop thinking about how I was going to die down here of dehydration, alone in the dark, wedged in a metal tube. My fingers brushed against something cold and smooth in my jacket pocket. I realized my hand had been clenched around it for the last hour. I pulled it out, a glass vial, amber liquid, a sealed syringe. I'd taken it from the medical wing. I'd known I had it the whole time. I just hadn't admitted it to myself. The thirst had broken through that denial, and now I was holding it in the dark like it was the only real thing left. Like I'd been waiting for this moment without knowing it. I held the vial up to the flashlight beam. The liquid inside was clear and golden, like honey diluted in water. There was a label on the side, handwritten. I squinted at it, trying to make out the words. Project Endurance, Conversion Serum, Subject Preparation Protocol. I thought about the one promise I could still remember from the notes. Freedom from biological necessity. The subjects didn't need food, didn't need water, didn't need oxygen. They'd been sealed in tanks for 71 years, and they were still alive. Still conscious. Still aware. They'd survived. I opened the syringe packaging. My hands moved on their own. Muscle memory, or something deeper. I drew the liquid in. I didn't think about it. The thirst was too loud. The silence was too heavy. Cold liquid. It spread up my arm, into my shoulder, across my chest. The thirst evaporated. The claustrophobia dissolved. A warm, heavy peace sank through my veins. My breathing slowed. My heart slowed. My phone died. The screen went black. I sat in absolute darkness. I didn't need to see anymore, didn't need to move. The shaft walls pressed in, but they didn't matter. I just waited. The subjects had waited for 71 years in those tanks. I could wait too. I really appreciate you spending part of your night with me. I hope this story scratched that itch for something unsettling. There is a lot more on the way, so if you want to be here for the next one, hit that like button and subscribe to join the nocturnal crew. Take care of yourselves.